But let me just ask, since this is a tax debate, what is the difference between a socialist and a Democrat on taxes?
Well, I don't know the answer to that because I don't know what
I don't
other
either.
Democrats. I think it makes a lot more sense for us to make public colleges and universities tuition free and lower student debt rather than give the Walton family up to $50 billion in tax breaks.
Senator Cruz?
Let me say a couple of things. First of all, you notice Bernie didn't say a word in response to my point that 2014 of the top 20 political givers, 16 of them gave to Democrats. And I will note, in 2016, I listened to a certain candidate, a senator from Vermont, rail against Hillary Clinton for being captive to all the millionaires and billionaires that have funded the Democratic Party. So I agree. And listen, I will note, your campaign, like mine, were funded predominantly by grassroots voters. You had a ton
I did not get money from a super PAC funded by billionaires, Ted. You did. Well, I did not.
What I did receive was 1.8 billion contributions all across the country.
Contributions?
Million. We talk billions and trillions, these numbers start. 1.8 million contributions. Look, there is power to grassroots campaigns, and both of our campaigns enjoyed that. But the modern Democratic Party, of which you are today one of the leading voices and leading faces, you and Elizabeth Warren represent the heart of the Democratic Party, and that Democratic Party is captive to the special interest in Washington, to the billionaires.
Billionaires. Oh, my goodness.
George Soros, Tom Steyer, yes, they're billionaires, and they give massive amounts.
And the Koch brothers are just low-wage workers who are struggling to feed their families with their $95 billion in personal wealth.
Bernie, by the way, let's be clear. Most of the billionaires on the Republican side were not with me in this race. They were with other candidates also. Because, listen, you and I have agreed on one thing for a long time, which is Washington is corrupt. But let me ask you something. If Washington is corrupt, if both parties are in on favoring giant corporations and big business and big labor and all the people with power, where Bernie and I disagree is the solution. If Washington's corrupt, why would you want to give more power to Washington? Under all of these high taxes and regulations, the working class, the young, women are doing worse. And you're saying, keep on with the policies that aren't working.
No, not quite.
Taxes. And I got to say, this debate is very, very simple. Bernie and the Democrats want every one of you watching today to pay more taxes. And Republicans want to lower the taxes for each and every person watching this debate. Now, tonight I'm going to make a prediction. Bernie's going to suggest in just a few seconds that this is not really about you. This is about, quote, taxing the rich. That's what the Democrats always say. But here's what you need to know. Every time Bernie says the rich, what he means is taxpayers. And so if you pay taxes, he's talking about you. Now, how do we know this? We know this because there's a difference between facts and rhetoric. Bernie's tax plan cost over $13 trillion. That's what he's proposed raising in new taxes. And who pays for it? Well, the Democrats always talk about the millionaires and billionaires. But here's a simple fact. We could take every single person making $1 million a year or more and confiscate 100% of their income, everything they make, every penny. And it would raise about $1 trillion, about 8% of the cost of Bernie's tax plan. That means if you want tax revenue, you don't get it from the millionaires and billionaires. You get it from the middle class. You get it from the working men and women in this country. Tax cuts are about jobs and more money in your pocket, more money for the single mom to buy books for her kids, for the truck driver to be able to afford sending his daughter to college, for the family who's struggling to make ends meet to be able to save up and go to Disney World. This debate is very, very simple. Bernie and the Democrats want to raise your taxes, and the Republicans want to cut them so that you have more in your pocket.
Senator Cruz, thank you.
At the George Washington University here in Washington, she has a question for Senator Cruz. Kelsey.
Senator Cruz, I come from a middle-class family, and I worked hard in high school to get into a competitive college. But even after academic scholarships, my parents and I are still struggling to afford my education, and that's without indirect costs. So it's hard then for families like mine to see the benefits of cutting corporate tax rates and reattempting trickle-down economics when that hasn't been a long-term solution for the middle class in the past. How would you justify cutting the corporate tax rate by 15%, but only barely making a dent in the tax rate for middle-class Americans?
Kelsey, thank you for your question, and congratulations on your studies. Look, I understand the frustration, and you know what? There are a lot of young people who feel frustrated. You've probably got student loans. I know when I was in college, I had about 100 grand in student loans, and wasn't sure how to pay for them because my parents had declared bankruptcy when I was in high school. So I understand that's hard. You asked why cut the corporate taxes for a young person. I'll give you the single best reason: because when you graduate, you want a job. Do you know the United States has the highest corporate tax rate of any developed country in the world? You look at countries all over Europe, you look at Ireland, you look at the United Kingdom, you look at France, they're cutting their tax rates, and what's happening is jobs are fleeing to those countries. Capital goes where it gets the right tax rate. And Bernie's solution is jack the taxes up even more. If you jack the taxes up even more, we've already got the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world. You'll see even more companies leaving, even more jobs leaving. And the frustration young people feel is you're coming out of school and you don't have opportunity. You know, Bernie talked a minute ago about the gap between rich and poor. He's right. It's growing. But it's grown dramatically under Barack Obama. Do you know that right now the top 1% have a higher share of our national income than any year since 1928? If you look at an article called The Greatest Wealth Transfer in History by Justin Gardner, New York Post editor, called the period between 2008 and 2015 the Great Fleecing. Those are the Obama years, because what happened? What happened is $4.5 trillion in wealth was accumulated in Wall Street, and that was with high Obama taxes, high Obama regulation, all the cronyism and favoritism of Washington. And the people that got hurt, the gap between rich and poor, widened more under Obama than under any other president. What I want to see is young people coming out with opportunity, and the way you have opportunity is to have 2, 3, 4, 5 job offers. When you cut taxes on small businesses and job creators, the result is everyone benefits because you have more opportunity, better jobs, and higher wages.
Senator Sanders?
Well, for a start, I commiserate with you as a student struggling. And what you should know is that in order to give incredible tax breaks to the 1%, the Republican budget that we're debating right now would slash Pell Grant funding. Pell Grants are the major source of federal help for working class young people. It would slash that funding, if you could believe it. At a time when so many young people are struggling to figure out how they're going to go to college, these guys want to cut Pell Grants by $100 billion. They want to cut housing assistance all over this country. If you're a young person, you're thinking of getting an apartment, getting a house. We have millions of people who are spending 40, 50% of their limited incomes on housing. They want to cut Section 8 housing and other housing programs by $37 billion. So what this entire proposal is about is to give tax breaks to people who don't need it, and you do that by making massive cuts in education, in healthcare, in housing, in the programs that working families desperately need.
Senator Cruz, you want to respond?
You know, I do. It's interesting. In his opening, Bernie invoked Robin Hood. And I got to say, I think Bernie fundamentally misunderstood that story. Robin Hood was robbing the tax collectors who were collecting too much taxes from the working men and women and taking it for the rich. In Bernie's analogy, it is the Democrats who are King John and the Sheriff of Nottingham. And Robin Hood is saying, tax collectors, stop hammering people who are struggling, who are laboring in the fields, who are working. Stop taking it to the castle to give out to your buddies. You notice Bernie's going to tell you all this free stuff he's going to give. And the Democrats love corporate welfare. They love to rail on the insurance companies. What they won't tell you is that under Obamacare, the profits for the insurance companies doubled. When you have Washington giving out goodies, the big guys do great. It's the little people who hurt. It's the young people. It's the entrepreneurs. Look, when my dad came to America from Cuba, he couldn't speak English. He was washing dishes. He was making 50 cents an hour. Our economy has been the place where people can come and do that.
Finance system. What this legislation is about is not for the working families of this country, no matter what Senator Cruz may say. What this legislation is about is to benefit the wealthy and the powerful and those who make large campaign contributions.
Senator Cruz, I want to give you a chance to respond, and then I do want to get to another citizen.
You know, there's a pattern you see of Democrats, which is they try to scaremonger. And so their latest villain is the Koch brothers. And they say this money in politics is what it's all about. But, you know, John Adams said, facts are stubborn things. Here's some facts. You look at 2014. In 2014, of the top 20 groups that gave money to politics, I guess listening to Bernie, they were all Republican. No, that's not the case. 16 of the top 20 gave primarily to Democrats. The top 6, Act Blue, Tom Steyer, the Carpenters and Joiners Union, the City of New York, the Democratic Governors Association, the NEA, gave almost exclusively to Democrats. Where did these mysterious Koch brothers fall on the list? Number 59. So they do a good job. Look, Democrats do great with rich people. In the last 8 years under Obama, rich people got richer. You know, the most stunning thing Bernie said is, gosh, Republicans don't care about young people or old people or people struggling. That is malarkey, Bernie. And the young people aren't able to get jobs. The people like my dad, the struggling immigrants washing dishes, have lost their jobs because of the taxes and regulations from Obama. And you're proposing more taxes, more regulation, without acknowledging what we're doing isn't working.
I don't think $1.9 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%, or do you think it makes more sense to invest $1 trillion rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our wastewater plants, our water systems, and doing that we can create 15 million jobs.
Senators, we want to get to somebody who wants to create those jobs, and that is John Conrad, who supports President Trump and runs a trucking company in Pennsylvania. He has a question for you, Senator Sanders.
Yeah.
Senator Sanders, over my lifetime, all we've seen is more government and more expenses, cutting taxes from top to bottom or bottom to top, however you view it. Then we'll give some relief to the burdensome expenses all Americans face. Why would you not want a tax cut across the board for all Americans?
Well, I do want a tax cut for the middle class and working families. But when the top 0.1% now owns as much wealth as the bottom 90%, when you have a handful of people with incredible wealth and power, no, I'm afraid that I will not support tax breaks for billionaires. Now, I don't know if you were there when President Trump, were you there when President Trump came to Pennsylvania?
I was.
Yeah. And President Trump was touting, as I understand it, the repeal of the estate tax, something that Senator Cruz supports. That's why he was there, correct? Let's talk about the repeal of the estate tax. The only people who benefit from that are the top 0.2%. 99.8% of the people do not pay a nickel in estate taxes. Senator Cruz will tell you about all the farmers and the ranchers. Well, Ted, there are 80 of them in the United States. The overwhelming majority of beneficiaries of this estate tax that Trump was supporting are people like the Walton family. Do you really believe that the wealthiest family in America should get a tax break of up to $50 billion, that the Koch brothers should get a tax break of up to $30 billion? Do you think that makes sense?
I did say all Americans.
Well, do you think that the wealthy should not get tax breaks?
I did say all Americans.
Okay, well, I happen not to believe that the Koch brothers need a tax break.
Senator Cruz?
Well, let me say a couple of things. One, Bernie once again said, oh, look, it's the super rich that we're going to pay the taxes. It's the top 0.1%, the millionaires and billionaires. You notice Bernie hasn't responded to the simple fact that if we confiscate 100% of the income of everyone making over $1 million, it produces about $1 trillion. Where does Bernie get the other $12 trillion that he's raising taxes? It comes from the middle class. And by the way, if you confiscate 100% of a person's income, the next year they're not going to work or produce it if you're going to take 100%. But let's take what Bernie just brought up now, the death tax. I think the death tax is one of them. No, it's the death tax because it kicks in when you die. You paid taxes your whole life.
No, your family pays it, yeah.
Then when you die, you see two people, the undertaker and the tax man.
No,
That's not fair.
Well,
and let me point out, you know, again, the rhetoric behind the estate tax is, oh, this is all about the rich guys. You know, the George Soroses of the world don't pay estate tax. They have armies of lawyers and accountants. They do all sorts of trusts and generation skipping. They don't pay it. The people who pay the death tax are farmers, they're ranchers, they're small business owners. Now, Bernie said a minute ago, oh, there are only 80. You know, there might be 80 in Vermont. But those facts are not right. And let me give some real facts. According to the U.S. Agriculture Census, there were 3.2 million farmers in America. 13% of the estates subject to the estate tax included farms. 1/3 of all farmers are over 65. And if you look at from 1995 to 2016, 102,000 closely held businesses and 36,000 farms paid the death tax. What does that mean? That means a family farm, when the farmer passes away and his or her kids inherit the farm, so often the first thing they have to do is sell the farm or take out big debts. A small business, if you've got a factory in a town and you've got equipment that is employing, that has workers working, and the owner of that small business dies under the death tax, the small business owner doesn't have the fancy lawyers and accountants that George Soros has. So the small business owner ends up having the kids sell the business and end up having to fire the workers. It's not fair.
Let me just say, no, we're staying on.
You've characterized this plan as bad policy, disastrous, and morally repugnant.
Yes. Matter of fact, I did.
One element of this plan calls for a reduction in the tax rate for small businesses like mine, who are already taxed at a higher rate than our corporate counterparts.
Yes.
Can you clarify for me
Look,
how that's disastrous or bad policy or repugnant?
But here's the point, Mark, and you make a good point. Small businesses are struggling with federal, state, local taxes. I got it. And we want to help small businesses. But, Mark, what this particular bill does, as I mentioned earlier, 80% of the benefits go to the top 1%, not to you, not to small businesses. And $269 billion go to the top 0.2%. So we come together in a bipartisan way and say we need to help small business. Yeah, I think you do need help, and I'm there for you. But please, as a nation, we've got to look at your issues as a small business person in a different way than we look at the needs or the so-called needs of the Koch brothers and billionaires. Does that make sense to you?
Sure.
Senator Cruz?
You know, it's interesting. Bernie said he's there for small businesses. And yet what he means by that is he's happy for you and anyone else to get a government check. But you notice he didn't talk about any taxes that he would cut. So when it comes to taxes, it's interesting. So, Bernie, you focus a lot on the death tax. I get that you like the death tax. All right, fine. You and I disagree.
I like the estate tax, though. I don't want to see it repealed, that's
okay.
for sure.
All right, so we disagree on that. But how about some of the other elements of the framework that have been put out? Because, you know, it's interesting. You're not for cutting any taxes. You're for raising everybody's taxes. So let me ask you some of the elements. One of the elements that's put out is doubling the standard deduction. So that for individuals, the first $12,000 you earn, you pay zero. For a couple, the first $24,000 you earn, pay zero. Now, are you for that or against that? Because you keep telling us what you're against. Or do you agree with any aspect of cutting taxes?
Yep, but I don't.
So you would double the standard deduction?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think it'll help working class families. But
right.
What I am not for, Ted, is repealing the individual exemption. Because what that will mean, if you have a large family, you got 2 kids, right?
I do.
And if, you know, a family of 2, 3, 4 kids, you know what? They're going to end up paying more in taxes. So I want to get rid of that part of it.
I'm not sure what you're talking about, but you would agree that increasing the standard deduction, letting a married couple pay zero taxes on their first $24,000 of income, that helps working class Americans? Would you agree with that component?
Yep, I would.
Okay, good. All right, we found some common ground. This is it is a miraculous night. All right, let's take a second element. An element, the gentleman that just asked the question, who's a small business owner, you said you're with him, you've got his back. One of the elements is cutting the tax rate for small business owners to 25% instead of being at 39.6%. Would you agree with cutting the taxes for small business owners to 25% so that he can hire more workers?
Mind paying the state taxes required to make New York one of the best states in the country. I've come to rely on that SALT, state and local tax deduction. And it's actually been on the books since income tax code was invented in 1913. It seems to me that many GOP senators from red states are deliberately trying to punish blue Democratic states by removing the SALT deduction, which benefits higher tax states. To me, this seems both unethical and bad policy. So my question for you is, why would a middle-class working mom like myself support taking away the middle-class SALT deduction so that the wealthy Americans like you can get more money? Thank you.
Well, Andrea, thank you for your question. Thank you for being here. Let me make a couple of points. Number one, I agree with you. The objective of tax reform should be cutting everyone's taxes. Cutting people's taxes in blue states, cutting people's taxes in red states. And if we don't do that, we've done something wrong. That's what I'm urging in Congress, that we should cut everybody's taxes. You're a mom with 3 kids, we need to be cutting your taxes. Now, I'll tell you, the state and local tax deduction is taken overwhelmingly by those earning $200,000 a year or more. It's those who are itemizing their taxes. It tends to be the wealthy. Now, I favor eliminating that deduction. Why? Because I don't think the federal government should be incentivizing states and local governments to jack up their taxes. But let me give a big caveat. I wouldn't favor eliminating that deduction unless we are lowering the tax rate enough that people in New York State, that people in Orange County, California, are paying less in total taxes. They're not deducting their state and local taxes, but the rate's a lot lower, so the check they're writing at the end of the day is smaller. And you know, I will say, you know, it's interesting you bring up New York. People vote with their feet. High taxes, what Bernie and the Democrats envisioning, jacking up taxes, we see it state by state. If you look at the 10 states with the highest tax rates, they have all seen, or virtually all seen, 9 of the 10 have seen population fleeing. Of the 10 highest states with tax burden, and New York is number 1, sadly, 240,000 people left those 10 states in 2015. And of the 10 states with the lowest tax burden, saw a net influx of 100,000 people in 2015. People are voting with their feet, and it's a combination of things. Number one, people are tired of sending more and more of their paycheck to the government. But number two, the high taxes and high regulations are killing jobs. The reason why you see people coming from high tax states to low tax states is in a state like Texas where we have low taxes, there are jobs. Jobs are plentiful. Young people have opportunity coming out. And so I agree we should lower taxes for everyone, but we see state by state an illustration of how what Bernie and the Democrats are proposing doesn't work, and people vote with their feet every single day.
To support my daughter. One of the hardest choices has been postponing my college degree so that I could afford my daughter's daily needs. One of the most expensive needs is childcare. I'm willing to sacrifice anything for my daughter, but working multiple jobs and still trying to make ends meet each month sometimes seems impossible. My question to you is that isn't the child tax credit a little too late for families like mine when I need to pay my bills every month, including childcare, not just in April?
Jasmine, thank you for that question, and let me commend you. I've got to say, being a single mom may be the hardest job there is in the whole world. And I'll tell you, I come from a family of single moms. My sister was a single mom. Both my aunts were a single mom. And for a period of time, my own mother was a single mom when my dad left us when I was a little kid. Thankfully, he came back, so I didn't grow up with a single mom. But the challenges that are on your shoulders, your kids are relying on you every day, and it's hard. You're trying to provide for them, you're trying to teach them, you're trying to raise them, you're trying to love them, and there are only so many hours in the day. And so thank you for the strength and courage you give every day for your kids. When it comes to the child tax credit, it's designed to help moms like you. It's designed to say you need more money in your pocket. And so part of the framework that's being laid out is to increase that child tax credit so that you would get more. And right now it's refundable, which means you can get a check. Not only do you not pay taxes, but if you're not paying taxes, you can get a check as well. And so it's designed to help make it easier to deal with how hard it is to be a single mom. But I'll tell you, I think the single best thing that would help you and so many other single moms is to have a growing economic environment where you had better job opportunities, where your wages were going up. I think it would make it easier to provide for your kids if your wages were going up and they weren't going down. And I would note there are a lot of single moms who are working a couple of jobs. Why? Because Obamacare defines a full-time employee as 30 hours a week. And there are millions of people across this country who are working 28 and 29 hours a week because their employers won't pay them full-time. They're single moms who are having to work 2 and 3 jobs at the same time. That's not fair. It's not right. And interestingly enough, Bernie and the Democrats don't have an answer to those moms who are the 29ers working 2 and 3 part-time jobs. I'd like to see you be able to get a job that pays you well, that puts you on a path towards a career to provide for your kids.
Mr. Cruz?
You know, we just witnessed a very important moment in this debate, which is that Bernie admitted that he wants to raise everyone's taxes, not just the rich. The question was, to pay for this socialist state, you got to raise everyone's taxes. And Bernie said, yep, that's right. Your taxes are going up. That is a rare moment of candor in Washington. You know, it's interesting, when I asked him the difference between a socialist and a Democrat on taxes, he couldn't tell me. I can't tell you either, because the Democratic Party today, the difference is Bernie admits his policies are socialist. Now, he lionized, hold on, I didn't interrupt you, Bernie. He lionized socialized medicine in Europe. If you look at socialized medicine, there are waiting periods, there's rationing. The government says if you're an elderly person, you need a hip replacement. It says, well, you may not get a hip replacement. We were talking about Denmark. The average wait time in 2014 for cataract surgery
leave that gentleman
was
up there?
83 days.
Come on back. Come on
and
back.
the average time
Sorry.
in Denmark, which he brought up, for hip replacement was 55 days, 59 days for knee replacement. There is a reason why, Bernie, I didn't interrupt you.
I'm
Just
not
relax.
interrupting you.
Just relax.
Come on. Sorry. It's the Italian in me.
You know, as some might say, curb your enthusiasm. By the way, the impression Larry David does of you is spectacular and uncanny.
Someday, you may also have somebody impersonating you. You gotta work on it, Ted.
You know, all I need is a bunch of left-wing comedy writers to want to glamorize it.
But
no, hold on. I was in the middle of making a point.
It's a long point, Ted. We're running out of time here.
Bernie likes to glorify socialism. But if you look at the greatest engine of prosperity the world has ever seen, it's the American free enterprise system. There is a reason millions of people risk their lives to come here. You know, he talks about poverty. Yes, we have people who are suffering in this country, but it's worth noting that in the United States, per capita income in the United States is over 5 times greater than the world average, and it's 50% greater than Europe. There's a reason why my dad, coming out of prison and torture in Cuba, came here with $100 in his underwear, because, you know, you go to socialized countries and you don't have the economic mobility. You got rich people that live like kings, but you don't have penniless immigrants who can go start a small business and work towards the American dream. And your answer is, let's make us like European socialism. I say, let's make us like American exceptionalism, free enterprise and opportunity for everybody. We had another moment that's important.
Oh.
Earlier, Bernie said he wanted to raise everybody's taxes. And now Bernie's admitted not only does he want to raise everyone's taxes, he wants to raise them to the highest level in the world.
Did I say
like
that,
Denmark.
Ted?
You said if we have this conversation, the American people will be ready to do that. You know what?
Don't put words into my mouth.
That is a verbatim quote.
No.
That
what I said is...
Bernie, I didn't interrupt you.
Yes, you did.
No. Well, I stopped when you pointed it out.
Don't interrupt me when I'm interrupting you.
Well said. Well said. You know, Bernie's pointing to health care, and you know, it's interesting. Socialism is always sold on a promise of tomorrow. Reagan used to point out that something liberals never seem to notice is that the rifles on the Berlin Wall all pointed one direction. As a Cuban American, I have a different way of looking at it. Something liberals never seem to notice. If you go down to Key West, the rafts from Cuba are all coming one direction. We don't see any Hollywood liberals jumping on rafts and heading to Cuba for free health care, because it doesn't work in practice. It's a disaster in practice. You know, we have an example of what government control of health care is. That's Obamacare. That was proposed. Bernie voted for it. It was his party. What has happened under Obamacare? Obamacare was sold to the American people on a mountain of lies. You were told, if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. Over 6 million Americans found out that was a lie and had their plans canceled. President Obama promised average premiums would drop $2,500 a year. In fact, they rose $5,000 a year.
We had the debate on health care. This is not health care.
You've been talking about health care for 20 minutes.
No,
So,
you've been talking about
while you guys,
we
we're going to take a very quick break.
Bernie, is it true or false?
We're going to take a very quick break.
Is it true or false that the profits of insurance companies doubled under Obamacare?
We're going to take a very quick break.
Senator Cruz, recent projections estimate that the tax framework currently under consideration would add $2.4 trillion to the debt over the next 10 years. What steps will you take to ensure that the tax reform doesn't add to the debt burden my generation is already facing?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a very good question. Listen, when it comes to the deficit and debt, it is immoral, the debt we have. When Barack Obama was elected, the national debt was $10 trillion. Today, it's $20 trillion. One president doubled what 43 presidents had built before. We've got to turn it around. That's a big part of why I ran for Senate. Now, how do you turn the debt around? I'll tell you, the only force big enough to turn the debt around is economic growth. Congress is not going to cut spending enough to bring the debt around. Economic growth, from 2008 to today, economic growth has averaged 1.2% a year. It's been miserable under the Obama economy. The average since World War II has been 3.3%, so we're about a third of what is historically true. You know, I mentioned two examples, the Kennedy tax cuts, where he cut taxes. We saw booming growth, and not only that, federal tax revenues increased from $49 billion to $87 billion when he cut taxes. Ronald Reagan, likewise, cut taxes, the economy boomed, and federal tax revenues increased from $347 billion to $549 billion. But let me make a point that's particularly important. There are two different approaches. High taxes like Obama or cutting taxes like Reagan. One works and one doesn't. I want to show you this chart, which is hard to see from where you are, so let me show you individual pieces of it. Because
how many charts do you have there? We're running out of time.
It's important, and Bernie, I'll let you see them.
I know that.
Obama versus, okay, Bernie, relax. Obama versus Reagan.
Your job is to moderate, guys. This is not a one-man show here.
He's answering his question, and then we're going to go to you.
Definitely a two-man show. He'll finish.
Right.
Obama versus Reagan. Under Obama, median income increased 6%. Under Reagan, 17%. How about African Americans? Under Obama, median income increased 8%. Under Reagan, 12%. How about women? Under Obama, median income increased 6%. Under Reagan, 25%. Young people, under Obama, 9%. Under Reagan, 55%. Young women, under Obama, 8%. Under Reagan, 73%. And finally, the bottom 20%, those struggling, under Obama, 12%, under Reagan, 40%. When you cut taxes and the economy booms, everyone benefits. That's what we need to do, and that's what the Republican majorities need to deliver on now. You've seen two fundamental views of government. Bernie and the Democrats believe government knows best. Bernie admitted that they want to raise taxes on all Americans. As Republicans, we have a Republican president. We have Republican majorities in both houses. We have got to deliver on our promise to cut taxes for working families, for small businesses, for farmers, for ranchers. I'll tell you what I believe, that you know better how to spend your hard-earned money than the government does, that you need to spend it to pay for braces for your kids, that you need to spend it to pay for new tires on your truck, or to save for retirement, or to start a business. And the simple reality is the high taxes of socialism and the Democrats don't work. If you remember no other chart, remember this one. There are a lot of young women here. Young women. Under Reagan, your incomes increased 73%. Under Obama, 8%. America is a land of opportunity. We're going to cut your taxes, and it's going to make a difference in terms of a better future for Americans all across this great nation.
Thank you, Senator.